Welcome to the cross in the desert, speaking hope and freedom to Iran. I'm your host, Randy O. Noble. I want to thank you very much for taking out of your busy time to spend it with me and learn about the plight of my friends in Iran and the latest current events and the happenings that are happening in this very troubled and dangerous nation. Well, if you've been following the continuous story, the saga of my dear friend Saeed Abedini, who is an Iranian Christian pastor who has been held hostage and captive in Iran, you will know there has been some very incredible developments over the past 10 days. Just recently, Saeed was transferred from his captivity in Evin prison in Tehran to a prison in Karaj at the foot of the Alborz Mountains, just 12 miles away from Tehran. This is probably one of the most dangerous and dirty prisons in the world. And you say, Randy, how can any other prison outside of Evin be dirty and dangerous? But it is. It has a capacity for only supposedly housing 5,000 inmates, but currently it is housing 22,000 inmates. These are some of the most dangerous criminals in Iran and maybe in the world that are cramped together in this small little occupied space under deplorable conditions. And that is where Saeed has been transferred to. Maybe because he's gained so much international attention. And this is a place where many prisoners are quietly, silently executed. And I want to talk about the deplorable conditions there at this prison. It's Rajai Shahr prison. The name of it is Rajai Shahr prison. And we're going to find out just what it's like. We're going to see a couple pictures of it. And actually, I'm going to read some comments by a former prisoner who actually became a prisoner again, writing and describing the deplorable conditions. But before I get into that, I want to talk to you about some very positive things that has been happening for Saeed. This week, the Reverend Patrick Mahoney in Washington, D.C. led a 5-day prayer and fast in front of the Iran Interest Building in Washington. Well, what is the Iran Interest Building? It's not an embassy. It's a place where you can get as close to Iran as possible. It's a building there housed in Washington, D.C. And this building is where the Reverend Patrick Mahoney and other Christians spent speaking out and praying for Saeed from Monday to Friday of this past week, November 11th through the 15th. And what a dedicated man of God. He not only spoke out and prayed at this Iran Interest Building, but he also went further into Washington to the White House and stood there at the gate, if you will, and spoke out, crying out for Saeed's freedom, calling out to our president and to get more involved. Now, he already had a telephone conversation with Rouhani a month or so ago, and he did call for Saeed's release, but the Reverend Mahoney believes, like many other Christians, that there needs to be a very serious stance taken for Saeed Abedini. In fact, just this past week, there was a Senate resolution passed speaking out for Saeed's release, and of course that was a bill introduced by Rand Paul. We thank God for our elected officials of great integrity and great honesty and great conviction for standing up for us like they're doing. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what's on that bill in just a few moments. But what I want to do right now is give you a couple of visuals of the place where Saeed is actually housed now. And this is in Karaj, Iran, like I mentioned to you. This is a close-up of the outside of Rajai Shahr prison, just 12 miles from Tehran, if you can see it. Now, this is also a visual. I would imagine this is like the kitchen. It's deplorable there. And let's get a picture of that. This is actually somewhere in the prison. It's deplorable, inhumane, that many prisoners lumped together. It's not just so many of the prisoners lumped together that makes it deplorable. These are very dangerous criminals on death row. Many human rights groups have reported from this prison about the deplorable conditions, the executions, the public executions. They'll drive in a semi, it looks like a flatbed truck, put up a crane and hang prisoners publicly. And they do things there that are just absolutely inhumane, the beating and treatment of prisoners. Just this past week or so, Saeed's father made an attempt to go to this prison and to give Saeed his medication. Now, that's the only way prisoners are going to get any kind of medical attention if someone in the family brings it to them. They don't provide it for them there. Now, Saeed, if you've been following this story, has been suffering from internal bleeding, and the only thing that's helped at all, hasn't cured it, is this medication. Well, his father came to the prison and was turned down and denied any access to his son. He was unable to give him this very important medication. It's just deplorable, the things that are going on there. What I want to do right now, I want to read to you a report from someone who actually spent time there. And ironically, he was rearrested and he's back in Rajai Shahr prison now. This is very important that you know the conditions of this prison. Let me set this up for you. This is not any attempt to be sensational or to be graphic on purpose. It is to give you a visual of just the seriousness and the graveness of this situation for our brother Saeed. It's so that if you hear this, you will be diligent to sign the petition if you haven't, and be diligent to lift him up in prayer, which is the most important thing, one of the most important things we can do. I want to read to you just what is all about this prison. Rajai Shahr is the place where political prisoners who are seen as a nuisance are stowed away. Going to Karaj is a severe punishment. Once in there, one stops to be a human being. One is put out of sight, even of human rights activists and the press. In Rajai Shahr, political prisoners have to share cells with dangerous criminals like murderers, rapists, and drug addicts who don't, quote, hesitate to attack their cellmates. They have nothing to lose. Many of them are condemned to death anyway. Murderers or unexplained deaths are a regular occurrence in this prison. Now, one of the reasons possibly that Saeed was transferred there is because of the international attention he has garnished from all of us who are speaking out, praying, and the Senate bill that was passed, just the interest, the worldwide focus and interest. And this is the way Iran handles this. By the way, just to keep you up to date, we've all heard the claim how moderate Rouhani is. Do you know that is really bogus? The executions have stepped up since Rouhani's been president. There is an ethnic, I call it, cleansing of political prisoners. They are executing up to 10 a day, as in contrast to what they were once doing at 10 a month. Now, I want to read you something very graphic. And again, this is not an attempt to be sensational. It is to bring home the point I'm trying to make. I want to paint a picture of Rajai Shahr prison. Though large in the eyes of the citizens of Karaj, in reality it is a very small prison because of overcrowding. There is a different world, much like the hell depicted in movies, full of fire and smoke. A world filled with burnt, black, disheveled faces, naked bodies covered with sweat and red marks from the sting of lice. A world filled with torn trousers, scraps of which are used as belts, bare and filthy feet, clothes worn inside out and covered with lice, torn, mismatched slippers. A world in which you are exposed to polluted air, the extreme smell of putrid waste, overflowing sewage from toilets, the toxicity of dry vomit, infectious disease, and the body odor from bodies in close proximity, rarely given the opportunity to bathe, all coming to a climax with the smell of urine by those who are unable to control themselves. All this against the backdrop of the tremendous uproar and cries of prisoners who seem to spend their entire day in lines. Prisoners standing in lines, holding plastic bottles that have turned black and severe as teacups, standing in multiple long-packed lines to use a bathroom, to take a shower. How do you survive in a lion's den? Because in many ways, our brother is like, in the Bible, Daniel in the lion's den. suffering tremendously for his Christian faith. Well, what I want you to do, first of all, before we go any further, I want to bring to your attention the website that you need to go to speak out for Iran and for Saeed. This is very, very important because it is BeHeardProject.com. BeHeardProject.com. You go to that website, and this is going to be a letter speaking about this recent situation with Saeed being transferred. And this is a petition that does make a difference. Make no mistake, your prayers and your voice is being heard. Also this week, in the latest developments with Saeed, I want to show you a picture of Saeed's beautiful wife, Nagma, and this pastor in Redwood, I believe it is, in California. And she was there. And this is very important that she keeps up speaking out for her husband, going to churches and places all over the world. And this is the pastor interviewing Nagma this morning at the church she was in California. And one of the questions that he asked her was, what is the most important request that you have for the body of Christ regarding Saeed and persecuted Christians? And Nagma's response was that those who are not in prison will continue to preach the gospel. And she never asked for a prayer to release Saeed. She's such an example of faith and courage to all of us. She said to the pastor who interviewed her, Saeed and I are nothing. We are just two people from Boise, Idaho, and God is using us. One soul is important. What a tremendous lady of faith she is. I just can't say enough good about what she has done. Now, I want to also bring to your attention some other developments with Saeed. And this is about the Senate resolution, unanimously passing a bipartisan resolution that directly calls on the government of Iran to immediately release Saeed Abedini and all other individuals detained on account of their religious beliefs. And of course, many Democrats and Republicans agreed on this bill. Rand Paul, the Republican from Kentucky, Roy Blunt from Missouri, the state that I live in. It's just so important to see that. Patrick Leahy, the Democrat from Vermont. This is an incredible bill. This bipartisan bill resolved. It speaks up for Saeed, recognizing the religious beliefs, the freedom of religious beliefs, and that it's a universal human right and fundamental freedom of every individual, regardless of their race and sex and country. It recognizes that governments have a responsibility to protect the fundamental rights of their citizens, and this bill calls for the government of Iran to immediately release Saeed Abedini and all other individuals detained on account of their religious beliefs. It is an amazing thing to see Republicans and Democrats work together for this kind of cause, and I'm very grateful for their hard work. I want to also mention to you, I have a 2-hour live blog talk radio once a month called The Cross in the Desert as well. And I have a half-an-hour one that I air twice a week. On this very special 2-hour broadcast that I had on November 7th, I had an incredible Iranian human rights activist. Her name is Shahr Paveh. And what I want to do is really highlight what she said to me in an interview on my program. I wrote a blog about her. And so the best way I can describe that is to read it to you so you can get to know Shahr Paveh. A continuous reoccurring theme in the Bible is standing up for the oppressed and seeking justice for the helpless. As a Christian, this is the passion of my heart, and in particular, I have this passion for my friends in Iran. Recently on my Cross in the Desert radio program, I had the privilege of interviewing Shahr Paveh, a prominent Iranian human rights activist who shares the same passion that I have in speaking up for the hopeless and oppressed. Shahr is a witness to the inhumane torture and oppression of people having grown up in Iran during the 1979 revolution. One of the most painful experiences Shahr experienced was saying goodbye to her father at the airport in Tehran. Her father was a military man under the Shah and was involved in a coup to overthrow the Ayatollah Khomeini, the new dictator of Iran, in 1979. Shadi vividly remembers her father telling her that if the coup was successful, she would see him again, and if not, she wouldn't. "There are some things worth dying for," her father proclaimed to her. Unfortunately, that was the last time that Shadi saw her father. He and many other generals were later executed by Khomeini. The unjust treatment of religious minorities in Iran, and particularly the Baha'i faith, was really the catalyst for Shadi to begin her campaign for human rights. Today she is busily involved in translating documents and letters from political and religious prisoners in Iran in order to expose their gross human rights violations and make them known to the world. Shadi explained the emotional toll the letters she translates has on her and describes how she finds herself weeping and sobbing for hours over their horrible conditions. One prisoner urged her in a letter to tell the world that since Hassan Rouhani, the new president in Iran, has taken office, the conditions in the prisons have worsened. Shadi pointed out there are now approximately 10 executions a day instead of 10 a month since the installation of the new president. The conditions in the prisons are deplorable, according to Shadi. There are 60 to 80 prisoners crammed in a small room, no beds or pillows. Therefore, the prisoners are forced to sleep on the floor together. Prisoners have no access to medicine. Many of them will die from infections and poisoned food if they don't first die from the continuous beatings and tortures that regularly occur almost every day. When I asked Shadi how does she emotionally cope after reading about suffering and evil in Iran, she responded by saying that every time she receives a letter, she prays and asks strength from God. Despite the 34 years of grotesque crimes that the Iranian government has committed against its people, Shadi still has hope for a free Iran one day. She believes that democracy and peace can only be achieved through forgiveness and hope. Goodness always triumphs over evil, according to Shadi. Being a voice for the voiceless is near and dear to my heart, and Shadi Pave exemplifies this in so many wonderful ways. She approaches her job with much humility and grace, with no intent to harbor hatred against the most vile of offenders. In our interview, she continually emphasized forgiveness. Well, forgiveness is what Jesus taught us to do when persecuted by our enemies. Forgiveness and mercy is who God really is. Shadi doesn't receive an income for her tireless work. She spends endless hours translating letters and being a voice for the hurting and oppressed. She remembers where she came from and has dedicated her time, life, and energy to those who cannot speak up for themselves. I truly respect and admire this courageous woman. Like her father told her for the last time, Shadi, there are some things worth dying for. Shadi has taken the last words of her father and given her life as he did in standing up for the voiceless. God is calling you and me to do the very same thing. Please be a voice for Saeed and all political prisoners. Go to the BeHeardProject.com and get the latest update on Saeed, and also sign the petition. These letters, these resolutions, and these dedicated prayers will make a difference in his life. He's in a very dangerous situation. And so we need to do what he can't do, and that is to be a voice for justice, for truth, and for his freedom. I really appreciate you spending your time with me on the cross in the desert. God bless you. I will see you next Sunday on another edition of The Cross in the Desert, speaking hope and freedom to Iran. Goodbye, and God bless you.